Everyone at the Palazzo Dorado knew the rule. Don't touch the janitor. Not because she was frail or old or sacred in some religious sense, but because the ones who forgot that rule never got the chance to apologize. The underworld called her La Guardiana. The smart ones just called her Ma'am. Paolo Pellegrini didn't know any of this. He crashed through the Art Deco doors that Tuesday evening like a meteor wrapped in Armani, bleeding from a gash above his eye, trailed by 3 bodyguards and a very bad decision. His muddy Ferragamos carved a path straight through Alicia Henderson's freshly mopped marble, toppling her yellow caution sign, scattering lemon-scented water across the pristine lobby floor. He didn't even look at her as he passed. When he finally did notice her, this woman in a gray jumpsuit, mop in hand, she standing perfectly still in the center of his chaos, he laughed. "Clean the floor, peasant," Paolo sneered, waving his nickel-plated Beretta in her general direction. "And do my shoes next." The lobby didn't just go quiet, it went extinct. Every hitman, fixer, and crime lord within 50 feet stopped breathing. And then the mop moved, not like a tool, like a sentence. In 3 seconds flat, Paolo Pellegrini, young lion of the Rossi family, terror of the dockside wars, untouchable prince of blood money, was flat on his back. His gun was gone. His breath was gone. And standing over him, boot pressed calmly to his chest, was a woman who looked like she'd just interrupted her tea to take out the trash. "Rule 1, Alicia said softly, her voice cold as November rain. "No weapons in the lobby." Paolo gasped, furious and humiliated, and opened his mouth to scream for his men to kill her. That's when Rocco, the hotel's head of security and a man who'd buried more bodies than he could count, stepped forward and put a hand on Paolo's shoulder. "Don't," Rocco whispered, his face pale as chalk. "That's not a janitor. That's La Guardiana." Paolo froze, because he knew that name. Every mobster, mercenary, and made man in the city knew that name. The enforcer who'd disappeared a decade ago. The woman who'd walked into a room of 40 armed men and walked out alone. The ghost who cleaned up messes so thoroughly, they became legend. She was supposed to be dead. She was supposed to be a myth. And Paolo Pellegrini had just spit on her floor. This is the story of how a man who owned half the shadows learned that some places belong to the light, and the woman who keeps it burning with nothing but a mop, a bucket, and a will of iron. The Palazzo Dorado didn't look like a place where killers came to rest. It looked like a place where angels might take afternoon tea. All gold leaf and crystal chandeliers, marble columns that rose like prayer toward a painted ceiling where cherubs danced in eternal, oblivious bliss. The lobby smelled of lemon oil and old money, and from hidden speakers somewhere in the crown molding, a piano played something slow and blue, the kind of jazz that made you remember things you'd rather forget. Alicia Henderson arrived at 5:30 every morning, just as the night shift was stumbling out, and the city was still deciding whether to wake up or die trying. She came through the service entrance with her cart, the same dented aluminum cart she'd been pushing for 7 years, loaded with microfiber cloths, bottles of polish that cost more per ounce than cocaine, and a mop handle worn smooth by 10,000 hours of methodical work. She didn't wear a name tag. She didn't need one. By 6, she'd have the East Wing's floors gleaming like black mirrors. By 7, the marble staircases would be pristine, each brass railing buffed until you could see your sins reflected back at you. By 8, when the first guests began to drift down from their rooms, she'd be in the lobby, moving in slow, concentric circles, her mop swaying in a rhythm that matched the piano. That's when you'd see it. The respect. A man in a charcoal suit, wanted in 3 countries for things polite people didn't discuss, would pause at the edge of her wet floor and wait, patient as a schoolboy, until she nodded him forward. A woman with a violin case that definitely didn't contain a violin would catch Alicia's eye and mouth, "Good morning, ma'am," before heading to the breakfast lounge. Even the new arrivals, the ones who came in loud and arrogant and fresh from some bloody triumph in the streets, would feel the shift in the air when they saw her. They'd see the way the old guard moved, the way they gave her space, the way their voices dropped to whispers when she passed, like they were in a church and she was the priest who knew all their confessions. Because the Palazzo Dorado was a church, in its way. A sanctuary, a neutral ground in a city that had forgotten the meaning of the word. The rules were simple, and they were absolute. No weapons in the lobby, no violence on the premises, no blood on the floors. You could be a warlord upstairs and a target downstairs, and as long as you respected the threshold, you could share an espresso with the man who'd sworn to kill you. You could sleep without one eye open. You could breathe. The man who'd built this place, Giancarlo Rossi, the Silver Dawn, dead now for 15 years, had done it with money and influence and a small army of enforcers. But the woman who kept it running, who made sure the rules held even after Giancarlo's bones turned to dust, was the one in the gray jumpsuit with the mop. Alicia didn't carry a gun. She didn't need to make threats or speeches. She simply was. The immovable object. The thing that bent the gravity of the room just by existing in it. Men who could order executions with a text message would step aside when she needed to wipe down a table. Women who'd burn down buildings for looking at them wrong would hold the door when Alicia pushed her cart through. At 8:15, like clockwork, Rocco would emerge from the security office with 2 coffees, one black, one with too much sugar, and set one on the corner of her cart, without a word. She'd nod. He'd nod back. It was the extent of their morning conversation, and it was enough. Rocco had worked at the Palazzo for 23 years. He'd seen managers come and go, ownership change hands. The world outside turned uglier and meaner. But Alicia, she was the constant, the cornerstone. By 9, the lobby would be full. A low hum of conversation in 6 languages, deals being made over pastries, vendettas temporarily shelved in favor of civilization. The jazz would swell. The light would pour through the tall windows in honey-colored shafts, and for a few hours, you could almost forget what these people did when they left. You could almost believe the world was a place where mercy still had currency. And at the center of it all, moving like a ghost through the margins, was Alicia, polishing, straightening, watching. Her presence was the promise. Here, you are safe. Here the rules apply. Here I will not let the monsters win. Until, of course, someone forgot. Until someone walked through those doors and decided the rules didn't apply to them. Until Paolo Pellegrini made the worst mistake of his life. Paolo Pellegrini arrived at 9:47 on a Tuesday, and he arrived wrong. The doors didn't open. They exploded inward, slamming against their brass stoppers with a sound like a gunshot. Every head in the lobby turned. Every conversation died mid-sentence. Because you didn't make that kind of entrance at the Palazzo Dorado unless you were running from something worse than death, or you were too stupid to know the difference. Paolo was bleeding. A gash above his left eye sent a ribbon of red down his temple, soaking into his collar. His $1,000 suit jacket was torn at the shoulder. Mud caked his Italian leather shoes, and he tracked it across the threshold like a man who'd never heard the word consequence. Behind him came 3 bodyguards, thick-necked, wild-eyed, guns already drawn, and behind them came the unmistakable scent of panic. The jazz kept playing, but it felt obscene now, like a requiem for something that hadn't died yet. Alicia was 20 feet away, near the center fountain, wringing out her mop into the yellow bucket. She didn't look up, not yet. But everyone else did. Every assassin, every fixer, every crime lord nursing their morning caffeine felt the air shift, felt the unspoken law about to be shattered, and they moved, slowly, carefully, toward the edges of the room. Paolo didn't notice. He was too busy looking over his shoulder, breathing hard, his hand white-knuckled around a nickel-plated Beretta that caught the chandelier light like a promise. His eyes scanned the lobby, cataloging exits, counting witnesses, seeing nothing but obstacles and extras in the movie of his own survival. "Lock it down," he barked at his men. "Nobody in, nobody out." One of the bodyguards moved toward the front desk. Another positioned himself by the door. The third started to approach Rocco, who stood near the elevators with his arms crossed and his face carefully, dangerously blank. That's when Paolo's foot caught the edge of Alicia's caution sign. He stumbled, cursed, and looked down at the yellow plastic triangle like it had personally offended him. His gaze traveled from the sign to the wet floor to the bucket to the woman holding the mop, and something ugly flickered across his face. Something that looked like relief, like he'd finally found someone smaller than his problems. "You," he said, his voice sharp as a blade. "What the hell is this?" Alicia lifted her head. Her expression was perfectly neutral. The expression of someone who'd seen this play out before and knew exactly how it ended. "Wet floor," she said simply. "Mind your step." Paolo laughed. It was a brittle, unhinged sound. "Mind my—" He kicked the bucket. Hard. It tipped, spilling gray water in a wave across the marble, soaking Alicia's boots, spreading toward the expensive Persian rug near the concierge desk. "Clean it up," he said, gesturing with the Beretta like it was an extension of his finger. "Clean all of it up, then do my shoes." The lobby didn't breathe. It didn't exist. 50 people became statues, she frozen in the moment before an avalanche. Alicia looked down at the water pooling around her feet. She looked at the bucket, now on its side, soap suds spreading in lazy circles. She looked at Paolo Pellegrini, this boy playing dress-up in his father's world, and she sighed. It was the sigh of a teacher who'd explained the lesson 3 times already. The sigh of a mother who'd warned you not to touch the stove. "Rule 1, Alicia said quietly, setting the mop against the fountain edge. "No weapons in the lobby." Paolo's face twisted. "Listen, peasant." The mop handle moved. It wasn't fast in the way a bullet is fast. It was fast in the way inevitability is fast. One moment it was leaning against marble. The next it was horizontal, hooking Paolo's ankle with surgical precision, yanking his legs out from under him with the ease of pulling a tablecloth. Paolo went down hard. His back hit the floor with a meaty thud that echoed off the cherubs on the ceiling. The Beretta flew from his hand in a gleaming arc, tumbling end over end, splashing into the fountain with a wet, pathetic plunk. Before he could gasp, before his brain could process what his body already knew, Alicia's boot was on his chest. Not pressing, not crushing, just there. A statement of fact. She stood over him with the mop handle in one hand, her gray jumpsuit darkened with dirty water, her face carved from stone. "Rule 1, she repeated, softer now, almost gentle. "No weapons in the lobby." Paulo tried to speak. His mouth opened, closed, opened again like a fish drowning in air. His bodyguards moved, one reaching for his gun, another stepping forward. But they froze when Rocco's voice cut through the silence like a knife through prayer. Don't. It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. The bodyguards looked at Rocco, looked at the 30 other people in the lobby who'd all taken a step back instead of forward, looked at the woman with her boot on their boss's sternum, calm as Sunday morning. Paulo finally found his voice. Get her off me, shoot her, kill her, nobody moved. And that's when Alicia smiled. Small, sad. The smile of someone who'd done this dance before and knew all the steps by heart. Rule 2, she said, pressing down just a fraction. Everyone leaves the Palazzo Dorado alive. She paused. Unless they insist otherwise. Paulo's face had gone from red to purple, his chest heaving under Alicia's boot, like a bellows trying to restart a dead fire. Humiliation tasted like copper in his mouth, mixed with the blood from his split eyebrow. He could feel every eye in the lobby on him, could feel his reputation crumbling like wet paper, and the only thing his brain could process through the white-hot fury was that this woman, this janitor, had made him look small. Marco, his voice cracked on the name. Marco, I swear to God, if you don't put a bullet in her skull right now. The bodyguard, Marco apparently, had his weapon half drawn when Rocco moved. Not quickly, not dramatically. He simply stepped between the barrel and Alicia with the tired authority of a man who'd already decided which hill he was willing to die on, and it was this one. Put it away, Rocco said. Marco's hand trembled. Tucci, boss gave an order. And I'm giving you advice. Rocco's voice was flat, emotionless, the tone of someone reading a weather report about an incoming hurricane. You pull that trigger, you won't leave this building. None of you will. There's 3 of us and 1 of you, old man, snarled the second bodyguard, a thick-shouldered man with a scar cutting through his beard. Rocco didn't even glance at him. His eyes stayed on Marco, patient and cold. There's 3 of you, 1 of me, and 50 people in this lobby who've killed more men than you've met. You think they're going to let you break sanctuary? You think they're going to let you put this place at risk? He finally looked at Paulo, still pinned beneath Alicia's boot. You think they're going to protect you? The lobby remained silent, but it was the silence of a jury that had already reached a verdict. A man at the breakfast bar, thin, gray-haired, with the quiet eyes of a career killer, set down his espresso cup and stood. He didn't draw a weapon. He didn't need to. The gesture was enough. Then a woman near the concierge desk rose. Then another man by the elevators. Then 3 more. They didn't move toward Paulo. They didn't move toward his men. They simply stood, a wordless wall of violence held in check by nothing but mutual agreement that this place was sacred. Marco's gun hand dropped slowly to his side. Paulo tried to sit up. Alicia's boot pressed down, not hard, just firm, and he gasped, going still. Who the hell are you people? His voice had lost its command, fraying at the edges into something closer to fear. Rocco finally allowed himself a long, untired exhale. He reached into his jacket, slowly, so no one got the wrong idea, and pulled out a worn leather wallet. From it, he withdrew a photograph, yellowed at the edges, creased down the middle from being folded and unfolded too many times. He walked over and held it where Paulo could see. The photo showed a younger Rocco, maybe 20 years ago, standing in what looked like a warehouse. Next to him stood 5 other men, all armed, all smiling like they'd just won the lottery. And in the center, with her boot on the chest of a sixth man, a man Paolo recognized even through the grainy film as Dante Volkov, the Chechen warlord who'd terrorized the ports until he mysteriously vanished, stood Alicia Henderson. Younger, leaner, holding a knife instead of a mop, Titi but unmistakably her. "We called her La Guardiana," Rocco said quietly. "The Guardian. She worked for the old families back when the old families still existed. When someone needed to disappear, she made it happen. When someone needed to be reminded of the rules, she delivered the message." He tucked the photo away. 43 confirmed. God knows how many more. Paolo's eyes went wide. That's a ghost story. She's dead. She's been dead for 10 years, Alicia said, her voice soft as silk. "I retired. Came here. Mr. Rossi offered me a job keeping his sanctuary clean, and I took it. I was tired of cleaning up bodies. Floors seemed like a better use of my time." She lifted her boot and stepped back, giving Paolo space to breathe. He scrambled backward on his elbows, leaving a smear of blood and dirty water on marble he'd insulted 60 seconds ago. "The name Paolo Pellegrini means something on the streets," Alicia continued, leaning on her mop handle like an old woman leaning on a cane. Casual, almost gentle. "You're the new generation, hungry, ambitious. Your father would be proud, I think, or horrified. Probably both." She tilted her head, studying him the way a naturalist might study a wounded animal. "But Paolo, you need to understand something. Out there, in your world, you might be a king. You might own territory and soldiers and enough firepower to level a city block." She gestured around the lobby at the watching faces, at the golden light streaming through stained glass, at the jazz still playing like nothing had happened. "In here, you're a guest, and guests follow the rules." Paolo tried to find his swagger, tried to summon the voice that made grown men flinch. What came out was hoarse, shaky. "You can't do this to me. Do you know who I am? Do you know what I know exactly who you are," Alicia interrupted. "You're the boy who just kicked over my bucket and pointed a gun at my face and told me to clean his shoes." She smiled, and it was the saddest thing Paolo had ever seen. "I also know what's waiting for you outside those doors. I saw the convoy circling the block when you ran in. Black SUVs, military-grade hardware. The Obsidian Vanguard doesn't mobilize 20 vehicles for a social call." The color drained from Paolo's face faster than the water from the tipped bucket. "So here's what's going to happen," Alicia said. "You're going to apologize. Then you're going to tell me why the most expensive death squad in 3 countries is trying to turn you into red mist. And then..." She glanced toward the tall windows, where the first of the black vehicles was pulling up to the curb. "We're going to figure out how to keep you breathing without burning down my sanctuary." She extended her hand. "Welcome to the Palazzo Dorado, Mr. Pellegrini. I'm Alicia Henderson. And whether you like it or not, I just became the only friend you have left." The first SUV pulled up at exactly 10:02, sliding to the curb with the predatory grace of a shark finding blood in the water. Then came the second, then the third. By 10:05, the Palazzo Dorado was ringed by a convoy of matte black vehicles that looked less like transportation and more like declarations of war. They didn't announce themselves with sirens or flashing lights. They simply arrived, each one positioning with military precision, blocking every exit, every alley, every route of escape. Men emerged from the vehicles wearing tactical gear that didn't carry any insignia, any flag, any identifier beyond the single obsidian shield patch on their shoulders. They moved like water, flowing into formation, establishing perimeters, setting up what looked like, and almost certainly was, a mobile command post directly across the street. Inside the lobby, the panic started quietly. A woman near the concierge desk stood too quickly, her chair scraping against marble. A man by the window pulled out his phone, stared at it, then put it away like it had just told him he had 6 months to live. Conversations didn't stop so much as they fractured, words tumbling into half-finished sentences that died in suddenly dry throats. Paulo was still on the floor, frozen, his eyes locked on the windows. "No," he whispered. No, they couldn't have. They didn't have time to." "They had plenty of time," said a voice from the breakfast bar. The gray-haired man who'd stood earlier, a Romanian named Vasile, if Rocco remembered correctly, walked over with his coffee cup still in hand, as calm as if he were discussing the weather. "You led them here. Probably had a tracker on you the whole time. Shoe, maybe. Or that fancy watch." He took a sip. "Amateur." "Shut up," Paulo hissed, finally finding his feet. His bodyguards clustered around him, hands on their weapons, eyes darting between the windows and the other occupants of the lobby, like they couldn't decide which posed the greater threat. Rocco moved to the window, careful to stay to the side, out of direct line of sight. What he saw made his jaw tighten. 20 vehicles, maybe more, and that was just what he could see from this angle. 40, 50 operatives at minimum, rifle cases being unpacked, communication equipment being assembled, a perimeter that would make a military cordon look like a kindergarten playground. "The Obsidian Vanguard," he said, and the name landed in the lobby like a stone in still water, sending ripples of recognition and dread through every professional criminal present. "Someone paid a lot of money to make you disappear, kid." The Vanguard didn't work cheap. They didn't work often. They were the option you chose when governments and cartels and multinational corporations needed someone erased so thoroughly that even the memory of them became a liability. They operated in gray zones and black sites, and the fact that they were here in broad daylight, surrounding a civilian building in the middle of the city, meant that someone very powerful had decided the collateral damage was acceptable. A woman in a burgundy dress, Katya, one of the regulars, an information broker who traded in secrets the way other people traded in stocks, stood near the elevators with her phone pressed to her ear. She listened for a moment, her face going pale, then lowered the device slowly. "They're broadcasting on police frequencies," she said, "saying there's a gas leak. Evacuation protocols, like they've cleared 3 blocks. "Smart," Vasile said. "No witnesses, no interference. They own the next hour." The jazz was still playing. Someone had the presence of mind to shut it off. The silence that replaced it was somehow worse. A younger man, couldn't have been more than 25, with the nervous energy of someone who'd gotten rich too fast in too dark a trade, stood abruptly from his table. "This is insane. I'm not dying for this idiot's mistakes. I'm leaving." He made it 3 steps toward the door before Rocco's voice stopped him. "You open that door, they'll assume you're part of this. You'll be dead before you hit the sidewalk. I'll take my chances." "No," Alicia said from behind him, still holding her mop like it was the most natural thing in the world. "You won't." The young man turned, saw her expression, and sat back down. Outside, a figure emerged from the central command vehicle, tall, broad-shouldered, moving with the economical precision of a man who'd spent his life learning how to kill efficiently. He wore no helmet, no mask. His face was all sharp angles and cold calculation. He carried a radio in one hand and what looked like a tactical tablet in the other. He looked directly at the lobby windows. Even from 50 feet away, through tinted glass, his gaze felt like a targeting laser. Then he raised the radio to his lips. 3 seconds later, every phone in the Palazzo Dorado chimed in unison. A text message, sent to every guest, every employee, every person inside the building. Paolo Pellegrini, you have 1 hour. Surrender him or the building burns. No negotiation, no exceptions. The lobby erupted, not in screaming or shouting, but in a low, vicious murmur of calculation. Eyes turned toward Paolo, hands moved toward hidden weapons. Alliances that had held for years buckled under the simple mathematics of survival. 1 hour, someone said. 1 man. Easy choice. He broke sanctuary, added another. He doesn't deserve protection. Throw him out, said a third. Let them have him. Paolo's bodyguards raised their weapons, backing toward the fountain, surrounded on all sides by people who'd been strangers 60 seconds ago and were now something much more dangerous. Rocco looked at Alicia. She was staring at the message on her own phone, her expression unreadable. Then she set the phone down gently on the concierge desk and turned to face the lobby. Nobody leaves, she said quietly. 50 voices rose in protest. Nobody leaves, she repeated, louder now, and the authority in her voice was like a physical force. And nobody touches Paolo Pellegrini. Vasile laughed, but there was no humor in it. You're going to protect him? After what he did? After he violated your precious rules? Alicia met his eyes. The Vanguard wants him. If we give him up, we tell the world that Sanctuary can be threatened, that the Palazzo can be intimidated, that the rules only matter until someone shows up with enough guns. She turned, addressing the entire room. You give them Paolo today, and tomorrow they come back for one of you, and the day after that, for another, until this place becomes just another building where people die. So what do you suggest? Katya asked. We die today instead? Alicia smiled. It was not a comforting expression. No, she said. We teach them why you don't threaten Sanctuary. She turned to Paolo, who looked like he was 10 seconds from vomiting or fainting or both. You want to live, Mr. Pellegrini? He nodded frantically. Then help me keep my floors clean. Alicia didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. The lobby had gone quiet in the way a courtroom goes quiet when the verdict is about to be read. Everyone leaning forward despite themselves, unable to look away from the woman in the gray jumpsuit and the terrified crime lord who'd made the catastrophic mistake of underestimating her. Paolo's hands were shaking. Not the tremor of fear alone, but something deeper. The full-body realization that every decision he'd made in the last hour had been wrong. That the world he thought he understood had rules he'd never learned. And the exam was already in progress. Sit, Alicia said, gesturing to one of the leather armchairs near the fountain where Paolo's gun still floated like a drowned promise. He sat. His bodyguards moved to follow, but Alicia's raised hand stopped them. Not you. Go stand by Rocco. If this goes badly, he'll tell you when to shoot and what to shoot at. Until then, you're furniture. Marco opened his mouth to argue. The look Alicia gave him could have flash-frozen nitrogen. He went to stand by Rocco. Alicia pulled over a chair and sat across from Paolo, her knees almost touching his. She leaned forward, elbows on her thighs, studying him the way a chess master studies a board, 3 moves from checkmate. Not with anger, not with contempt, with something closer to curiosity. Tell me what you did, she said. Paolo swallowed hard. I don't... The Obsidian Vanguard doesn't mobilize for petty grudges or unpaid debts. They mobilize for people who've seen things they shouldn't see, people who've taken things they shouldn't take, or people who've become liabilities to organizations that don't tolerate liabilities. She tilted her head. So which is it? What did you do that made you worth 50 professional killers and a blank check? For a long moment, Paolo said nothing. His jaw worked like he was chewing glass. Then, finally, quietly, I took something. From the Volkov operation. Rocco sucked air through his teeth. Even Vasile, still standing at the breakfast bar, looked impressed despite himself. The Volkov operation, Alicia repeated. Dmitry Volkov's organization. The same Dmitry Volkov who controls half the port traffic in the eastern seaboard. The same Dmitry Volkov who makes people disappear for looking at him wrong. She paused. What did you take? Financial records, account numbers, routing information for their money laundering pipeline. Paolo's voice was barely a whisper. Enough to collapse the entire network if it went to the right authorities, or enough to buy my way into the top tier if I used it right. And you chose option 2. I chose survival. Paolo's voice cracked. My father's operation was dying. We were being squeezed out by the bigger families, the international players. I needed leverage. He stopped, his hands curling into fists on his knees. I needed to matter. Alicia was quiet for a moment. The lobby had gone so still that the distant hum of traffic outside sounded like thunder. You wanted respect, she said finally. Not a question, a statement. Paolo's face twisted. I wanted to not be invisible. So you stole from Dmitry Volkov, and now he sent the Vanguard to make you invisible permanently. Alicia leaned back in her chair. That's almost poetic. Can you help me or not? Paolo's desperation was raw now, stripped of all pretense. I'll pay you, whatever you want. I've got money, I've got connections, I don't want your money. Alicia's voice was flat. And your connections are worth less than the water you kicked across my floor. Paolo's face crumpled. But, Alicia continued, I do want something from you. Hope flickered in his eyes like a candle in a hurricane. You broke the peace, Alicia said. You came into my sanctuary bleeding and panicked. You brought violence and chaos and weapons into a place that exists specifically to be free of those things. You disrespected the rules, disrespected me, and you endangered every single person in this building. She leaned forward again, close enough that Paolo could see the flecks of gold in her brown eyes, could see the decades of controlled violence written in the lines around her mouth. So here's your choice, Mr. Pellegrini. You help me defend this place. You follow my orders without question, without hesitation, without ego. You become part of the solution to the problem you created. And if I refuse? Alicia stood. She walked to the window, looked out at the black perimeter, at the men with rifles and tactical gear, and the absolute certainty that they were the apex predators in this equation. Then she turned back to Paolo. Then I open that door and give them what they came for. 1 life to save 50. It's simple mathematics. Paolo's face went white. You'd just hand me over? In a heartbeat, Alicia said, and there was no cruelty in it, no satisfaction. Just the cold pragmatism of someone who'd made harder choices and lived with the consequences. I protect the sanctuary. That's my job. That's my purpose. If you're a threat to it, then you're a problem to be solved. She walked back to where he sat, stood over him with the same calm she'd had when her boot was on his chest. But if you help me, if you prove that you understand what this place means, what these rules protect, then you're not a problem anymore. You're a guest. And I protect my guests. She extended her hand again, the same gesture she'd made before, when Paolo had still been choking on his own humiliation. So what's it going to be? Do you want to die for your pride, or live for something better? Paolo stared at her hand, at the calluses on her palm from years of gripping a mop handle, at the scars on her knuckles from years of gripping things that fought back. He thought about the vanguard outside, about the gun at the bottom of the fountain, about his father, dead these 3 years, who'd built an empire and died with nothing but enemies at his funeral. He thought about what it meant to matter. Then Paolo Pellegrini, crime lord, thief, fool, reached out and took the janitor's hand. "Tell me what you need," he said. Alicia's smile was small, but it was real. "First," she said, "you're going to tell me everything you know about Vanguard tactics, their protocols, their entry strategies, their weaknesses. I don't know if they have—" "Everyone has weaknesses," Alicia interrupted. "Even ghosts bleed if you know where to cut." She pulled him to his feet. "Second, you're going to help me turn this building into a fortress. We have 1 hour before they come for you. We're going to make it the longest hour of their lives." She turned to address the lobby, her voice carrying to every corner. "Anyone who wants to leave, now's your chance. Take the service tunnels, go through the old prohibition passages, get out however you can. I won't stop you." She paused, letting the offer hang in the air. "But anyone who stays fights. Not for Paolo, for the idea that some places in this world are still sacred, that some rules still matter." Nobody moved toward the exits. Jean Vasile set down his coffee cup and cracked his knuckles. "Haven't had a good siege in years." "I'm in." Katya nodded. "They blocked my shipment last month. I owe them some inconvenience." One by one, the occupants of the lobby made their choice. Not with words, but with the simple act of staying put, of picking up weapons they'd checked at the door, of looking toward Alicia for orders. She smiled. For the first time since Paolo had kicked over her bucket, she smiled like she meant it. "Then let's get to work. Are you still here? If you are, kindly hit that subscribe button if you haven't. It keeps me going. Thank you." The Palazzo Dorado had been built in 1927 by a bootlegger named Vincent Calabresi, who'd understood that staying alive in a city full of people who wanted you dead required more than guns and hired muscle. It required architecture. The building was a fortress disguised as a palace, with steel-reinforced walls hidden behind gilded plaster, doors that could withstand battering rams concealed by ornate molding, and a network of passages and choke points that turned elegance into tactical advantage. Alicia had spent 7 years learning every inch of it. Every hidden panel, every service corridor, every ventilation shaft and maintenance tunnel, and forgotten Prohibition-era escape route. She'd memorized it the way a pianist memorizes a concerto, until the building became an extension of her own body. Now it was time to conduct. She moved through the lobby with Rocco at her side, pulling a ring of keys from her belt that looked like something a medieval jailer might carry. "Main elevators first," she said. She was already heading toward the brass-doored lifts on the east wall. "Lock them on this floor. Cut the power to the motors. I want them useless." Rocco nodded and peeled off toward the electrical room. Alicia inserted one of the skeleton keys into a maintenance panel beside the elevator bank, twisted and pulled. The panel swung open to reveal a maze of cables and switches that would have looked like chaos to anyone else. To her, it was a map. She flipped 3 switches in sequence, and somewhere in the machinery above, massive brakes engaged with a pneumatic hiss. The elevators were now 400-pound coffins going nowhere. "Service stairs," she called to Katya, who'd appeared at her elbow with the efficient calm of someone who'd prepared for violence her entire life. "Second sub-level access. Seal it, so use whatever furniture you need." "Already on it." Katya gestured to 3 men who'd materialized from the breakfast lounge, already carrying chairs and tables toward the stairwell. "What about the parking garage?" "Leave it open. We need them to think they have an option." Alicia moved toward the concierge desk, where Paolo stood with his bodyguards, looking like a man who'd just realized he'd signed up for a war he didn't know how to fight. "Mr. Pellegrini, you said you know Vanguard tactics. Prove it. Where do they hit first?" Paolo blinked, his brain visibly struggling to shift gears from panic to analysis. Then something clicked behind his eyes. The instinct that had kept him alive in his father's world. The ability to think like a predator even when you were prey. "They'll send a recon unit first. 3, maybe 4 operators. When not through the front, too exposed. They'll look for secondary access, service entrances, rooftop extraction points, underground passages." "We've got all of those," Alicia said. "Which one would you choose?" Paolo closed his eyes, thinking. "The parking garage. 2 levels down, multiple vehicles for cover, direct access to the service elevators and the old tunnels. It's where I'd stage for a quick extraction, or a breach if the front fails." Alicia looked at Rocco, who'd returned from the electrical room. "Thoughts?" "He's not wrong," Rocco admitted grudgingly. "Garage gives them options, and the tunnels connect to 3 other buildings. If they secure those, they can cut off any escape." "Then we make the garage a trap." Alicia turned back to Paolo. "What else? After recon fails, what's their next move?" "Breaching charges on the reinforced doors. Probably the south entrance, since it's the farthest from their command post. They'll assume we're focused on the front. And..." Paolo hesitated. "And what?" "They'll send someone through the ventilation system. The Vanguard trains specialists for confined space infiltration. If this building has central air, they'll use it." Alicia's jaw tightened. She pulled another key from her ring, this one smaller, brass instead of steel. "Rocco, with me. Katya, take 4 people and get to the garage. I want sightlines established, vehicles repositioned for cover, and motion sensors on every tunnel entrance. You have 10 minutes." She was already moving toward the back hallway that led to the mechanical rooms, her boots clicking against marble like a metronome counting down to something inevitable. Paolo followed, his bodyguards trailing behind like uncertain shadows. The mechanical room was in the basement, accessed through a steel door that Alicia unlocked with 3 separate keys in sequence. Inside, the air was hot and thick with the smell of oil and old machinery. Massive HVAC units hummed like sleeping dragons, their ductwork spreading through the ceiling like silver arteries feeding the building above. Alicia moved to a control panel on the far wall, ancient and industrial, covered in switches labeled in faded typewriter font. "The ventilation system is segmented," she explained, her fingers dancing across the controls. 8 separate zones. I can shut down individual sections without killing airflow to the whole building. She flipped a series of switches, and the hum of the machinery shifted, deepened. Zones 3 through 6 are now closed. Those cover every major duct big enough for a human to crawl through. Anyone trying to infiltrate that way is going to hit sealed dampers. "What about the zones you left open?" Paolo asked. Alicia smiled. "Those lead to places where I want them to go," She pulled a notebook from her pocket, flipped to a hand-drawn schematic of the duct system that looked like it belonged in an engineer's office. Zone 2 terminates in the old laundry room. One entrance, no exits, and I've got Vasile setting up down there with enough incentive to discourage visitors. Paolo stared at the schematic, then at Alicia. You've planned for this, for an assault on the building. I've planned for everything, Alicia said simply. That's what keeping sanctuary means. Hope you never need the plan, but have it ready when you do. They returned to the lobby to find organized chaos. The furniture had been repositioned. Chairs and tables moved to create firing lanes and cover points without destroying the aesthetic. It still looked like a luxury hotel lobby, but now it looked like a luxury hotel lobby that understood geometry. Rocco had established a command post behind the concierge desk, two-way radios distributed to key defenders, sight lines marked with subtle chalk marks that wouldn't offend the decor. Windows? Alicia asked. Bulletproof glass, original construction, Rocco said. It'll hold against small arms fire, maybe even the first few rifle rounds. After that, we're in trouble. Then we make sure they don't get that many shots. Alicia turned to the assembled defenders, 15 in total, each one a professional in their own terrible trade. Listen carefully. The vanguard operates on overwhelming force and shock tactics. They expect panic. They expect chaos. We're going to give them silence. We're going to give them control. And we're going to give them a target they can't hit because they're too busy hitting the walls we put in front of them. She moved to the center of the lobby, near the fountain where Paolo's gun still floated. Paolo broke the rules, but the vanguard threatened sanctuary. Between those two sins, I know which one I can't forgive. She looked at each defender in turn. We hold this building, not for him, if for the idea that there's still one place in this city where the violence stops at the door. Vasile raised his coffee cup. Somehow he'd acquired a fresh one. To sanctuary. To sanctuary, the others echoed. Alicia checked her watch. 42 minutes until the deadline. Positions, she said quietly. And the Palazzo Dorado, that temple of neutral ground and temporary peace, transformed into something the Obsidian Vanguard would remember for the rest of their considerably shortened careers. They came at 37 minutes past the hour, exactly when Paolo said they would. Not through the front doors where the command post had excellent sight lines and too many witnesses with cell phones, despite the supposed evacuation. They came through the South Service entrance, a reinforced door that opened onto a loading dock where deliveries arrived at dawn and bodies might leave at dusk if circumstances required. Alicia watched them on the security monitor Rocco had pulled up behind the concierge desk. 4 operators, moving in a tight diamond formation, their weapons up and ready, their movements synchronized like a dance they'd performed 100 times before. Professional, efficient, utterly confident that the door would fall and the building would open like a cracked egg. The first operator reached the door and placed a small charge against the lock mechanism. His hands moved with the practiced economy of a surgeon. The other 3 positioned themselves in a breach formation, ready to flow through the opening the moment it appeared. Alicia pressed a button on the radio. Once. No words. Just a click. In the sub-basement, Vasile heard the signal and smiled. He threw a switch on the fuse box he'd been standing beside for the last 20 minutes. The loading dock's exterior lights died. Not flickering, not sparking, just gone, dropping the vanguard operators into absolute darkness in the span of a heartbeat. Night vision would compensate, Alicia knew. They'd be disoriented for maybe 2 seconds. She'd planned for that. The charge detonated with a muffled crack. The door swung inward. The first operator stepped through into the darkness, and immediately his boot hit something that shouldn't have been there. A thin wire stretched ankle-high across the threshold, invisible in the dark, connected to nothing explosive or lethal. Just a wire tied to a shelf stacked with industrial cleaning supplies. The shelf toppled. 40 pounds of bottles and boxes crashed down, not onto the operators but around them, the noise catastrophic in the enclosed space, breaking their tactical silence, forcing them to react to a threat that was all sound and fury, signifying nothing except distraction. Which is when the second trap activated. The fire suppression system for the loading dock, ancient, temperamental, and rigged by Alicia that morning to respond to a manual trigger instead of heat, erupted. Not with flame-retardant foam, but with water. Gallons of it, pressure-fed from the building's reserve tanks, flooding the enclosed space in a deluge that turned the floor into a skating rink and the air into a gray curtain of spray. The operators fell back, weapons up, trying to maintain formation while their boots lost purchase on suddenly frictionless concrete. One of them keyed his radio, reporting the breach compromised, requesting. The radio died. All 4 radios died simultaneously, their electronics fried by the electromagnetic pulse device that Katya had positioned in the ceiling. Military surplus she'd acquired from a Turkish arms dealer, she'd explained with a shrug. Useful for occasions exactly like this. In the lobby, Paolo watched the monitor with his mouth slightly open. "They're not even inside yet," he whispered. "That's the point," Alicia said quietly. "Every second they spend outside is a second they're not inside. Every moment of confusion is a moment we're still breathing." The Vanguard operators regrouped, backing out of the loading dock, drenched and communicationless, but not panicked. They were too well trained for panic. They'd regroup, reassess, try another entry point. Alicia was counting on it. "Garage," she said into her radio. "You're next." 2 floors down, in the parking structure where Paolo had predicted the Vanguard would stage their secondary assault, 3 more operators were already moving between the vehicles. They'd entered through the tunnel system, just as Paolo had said they would, emerging into the dim, fluorescent-lit space with weapons raised, scanning for targets. They found none. The garage was empty. Abandoned cars sat like sculptures in the yellow light. No movement. No sound except the hum of ventilation and the distant drip of water from a leaking pipe. The lead operator signaled his team forward. They moved deeper into the garage, toward the elevator bank and the stairwell access that would take them into the building proper. They made it 15 feet before the lights cut out. This time it wasn't just darkness. It was absence. No emergency lighting, no exit signs, no ambient glow from the tunnel behind them. Just blackness so complete it felt solid. And then the cars started screaming, not literally. But every car alarm in the garage activated simultaneously. 20 vehicles all shrieking their electronic distress into the enclosed concrete space, the sound bouncing off walls and ceiling, turning the darkness into a physical assault. The operators couldn't hear each other, couldn't coordinate, could barely think through the sonic assault that made their teeth ache and their inner ears scream for equilibrium. One of them, later, reviewing helmet camera footage, Alicia would learn it was the team leader, made a hand signal to fall back. But hand signals required light, and they had none. He reached for his backup flashlight and found it missing, removed from his tactical vest during the brief moment when he'd squeezed through the narrow tunnel entrance where Katya's people had been waiting in the dark, with quick hands and quicker knives for cutting equipment free. The Vanguard operators retreated blind and deaf, stumbling over concrete parking blocks, colliding with vehicles, their professional composure finally cracking as they realized they were fighting an enemy who refused to fight, who simply made the building itself reject them like a body rejecting a virus. Back in the lobby, Rocco looked up from another monitor. "Third team, rooftop access. They're coming down the maintenance ladder." Alicia nodded. She'd expected this too. "Is he in position?" "Has been for 10 minutes. On the roof, where the Vanguard had sent their lightest, most agile climber to descend the exterior maintenance ladder and access the 8th floor window, that climber suddenly found his handholds coated in something slick, something that smelled faintly of lemons. Industrial-grade floor polish, applied liberally to every rung, turning the descent into a nightmare of uncertain grip and failing confidence. He made it down 3 more rungs before his hand slipped. He caught himself, but now both hands were slick. Now his boots were sliding, and the window was still 6 feet away, and he was hanging 40 feet above the street, and his radio wasn't working, and his team couldn't hear him, and all he could think was that this wasn't supposed to go like this. He retreated upward, slowly, carefully, his confidence in the operation evaporating like morning dew. Paolo was staring at Alicia now with something approaching awe. "You're not fighting them." "No," Alicia agreed. "You're just making it impossible for them to fight you." "Violence is easy," Alicia said, her eyes never leaving the monitors. "Any idiot with a gun can be violent. But defense, real defense, that's about understanding that every action costs something. Time, resources, confidence, morale." She glanced at him. "Your Vanguard friends are very good at killing. But they're not good at killing things that won't cooperate with being killed." Another radio click. This time from Vasile in the sub-basement. "4th team in the old tunnels. They hit the sealed doors, tried to blow them. Charges malfunctioned. They're retreating." "Malfunctioned," Paolo repeated. Alicia smiled slightly. "The charges that Katya may have replaced with training dummies while the Vanguard was still setting up their perimeter. Pure coincidence, I'm sure." Rocco checked his watch. 18 minutes to deadline. They've sent 4 teams. All 4 failed. What do you think they're thinking out there? Alicia looked at the main monitor, the one showing the command vehicle across the street. The tall commander was visible through the windshield, and even from this distance, even through security camera grain, his frustration was evident in the rigid set of his shoulders. "They're thinking," Alicia said quietly, "that they've never failed before. They're thinking their reputation is on the line. They're thinking that if they can't breach a hotel defended by a janitor and a handful of criminals, they're finished." "So they'll escalate," Paolo said. "So they'll escalate," Alicia confirmed. "And then?" She turned to look at him directly, and in her eyes Paolo saw something that made him understand why she'd retired, why she'd traded the knife for the mop, why she'd chosen sanctuary over slaughter. "Then we show them what happens when you threaten sacred ground." The deadline came and went like a held breath finally released. 11:02. Then 11:03. The Palazzo Dorado stood silent in the gray morning light, its windows dark, its doors sealed, its occupants waiting in the specific kind of stillness that comes before either salvation or slaughter. At 11:04, the commander stepped out of his vehicle. Alicia watched him on the monitor. Shah watched the way he moved with the certainty of a man who'd made his decision and accepted its consequences. He raised his hand. 12 operators emerged from the SUVs, not in tactical teams now, but as a single unified force. They carried breaching equipment, ballistic shields, enough firepower to level a city block. This wasn't reconnaissance anymore. This wasn't surgical extraction. This was annihilation dressed up as professionalism. Main doors, Rocco said unnecessarily. All of them. Simultaneous breach. They're done being subtle, Vasile observed from his position near the stairwell. Can't say I blame them. We made them look like amateurs. Paolo stood beside Alicia, his earlier terror transmuted into something steadier. Not courage exactly, but acceptance. When they come through those doors, we can't stop them all. Not with 15 people and improvised defenses. No, Alicia agreed. We can't. She walked to the center of the lobby, to the fountain where Paolo's gun still floated in water that reflected the chandelier above like a drowned constellation. She reached in, pulled the weapon out, ejected the magazine, cleared the chamber, and set both pieces on the marble. Then she pulled her keyring again, selected the smallest key, ancient brass, worn smooth by decades of use, and walked to a panel in the wall that most people assumed was decorative. It wasn't. The panel opened to reveal a master electrical junction, the original 1927 wiring that fed the entire building. Modern breakers and safety systems had been added over the years, but this was the heart, to the kill switch that Vincent Calabrese had installed because he understood that sometimes the best defense was making your castle disappear. "What are you doing?" Paolo asked, but his voice said he already knew. "Leveling the field," Alicia said. She looked at Rocco. "Flashlights. Night vision if anyone has it. Weapons ready, but safety's on. Nobody fires unless I give the order. And if they fire first, they won't." Alicia's hand hovered over the main breaker. "Not if they can't see what they're shooting at." Outside, the Vanguard operators reached the doors. 3 teams, 4 operators each, synchronized down to the heartbeat. They placed their charges, shaped explosives designed to turn reinforced steel into modern art. The commander raised his hand, fingers counting down. 3, 2, 1. Alicia threw the breaker. The Palazzo Dorado died. Every light, every exit sign, every electronic lock and security camera, and the faint background hum of modern civilization, gone. The building dropped into darkness so complete, it felt like falling into deep water, like being buried alive, like the moment between heartbeats when you're not sure the next one will come, and then the doors exploded inward. The Vanguard came through fast, their flashlight beams cutting the darkness into geometric shapes, their weapons up, their training overriding the primal fear of entering a space that had just gone from fortress to tomb. They expected resistance. They expected gunfire. They expected the desperate last stand of cornered criminals. They got silence. The lobby was empty. No defenders at the concierge desk. No shooters behind overturned furniture. No targets at all. Just abandoned positions and the echo of their own breathing and the faint sound of water dripping from Paolo's recovered gun on the marble floor. "Clear," one operator called. "Clear," answered another. They advanced deeper, their formation tight, their lights sweeping corners and checking angles. Professional, textbook. Exactly what their training dictated, which is why they didn't see Alicia until her mop handle took the first operator's knee from the side, a precision strike that buckled the joint without breaking it, sending him down in a controlled collapse. His flashlight skittered across marble. His weapon's safety was still on. They were supposed to capture Paolo alive after all. So when his finger tightened reflexively on the trigger, nothing happened. The darkness swallowed him. The second operator spun toward the sound, his light searching, his training screaming that threats came with muzzle flash and sound. But Alicia was neither. She was movement in negative space, a shadow with purpose, and by the time his flashlight found her, she was already inside his guard. Her palm struck his radio, cracking the casing. Her other hand found the pressure point below his ear. He went down dreaming of violence he'd never commit. "Contact!" the third operator shouted, and now they were firing, but into darkness, at movement they couldn't track. Their bullets hitting walls and ceiling, and the ballistic shields they'd brought for protection that now became obstacles in the confined space. From the stairwell, Katya's team moved. Not shooting, just controlling. They had the territorial advantage, knew every corner, sees every pillar, every piece of cover. They used flashlights like weapons, strobing them to destroy the vanguard's night vision, creating disorientation instead of illumination. Paulo found himself moving without thinking, using the knowledge he'd spent his adult life acquiring, how to move in darkness, how to read the flow of combat, how to find the gaps in an enemy's awareness. He wasn't a fighter like Alicia, wasn't trained in the specific art of controlled violence, but he understood chaos. And he understood that sometimes survival meant making yourself a problem the enemy couldn't solve. He grabbed a fire extinguisher from the wall and discharged it into the lobby. White chemical fog filled the space, turning flashlight beams into diffuse, useless glow, turning the vanguard's expensive night vision into expensive blindness. In the confusion, Alicia moved like water through cracks in stone. She didn't kill, that would violate the sanctuary, but she neutralized. Weapons disappeared from hands. Radios stopped working. Operators found themselves on the ground, wondering how they'd gotten there. Their training useless against an enemy who fought like she was conducting an orchestra rather than a war. 5 minutes. That's how long it took. 5 minutes of silence and darkness, and the systematic dismantling of the Obsidian Vanguard's reputation. And then Alicia was standing at the broken door, facing the commander who'd finally entered himself, his weapon raised, his face a mask of professional fury and dawning understanding. "Your men are alive," Alicia said quietly, her voice cutting through the chemical haze. "Every single one. They'll wake up with headaches and bruised egos, but they'll wake up. That's more mercy than you were planning to show us." The commander's weapon didn't waver. "Stand down." "No." Alicia took a step forward. "You stand down. You take your men, your vehicles, your reputation, and you leave. You tell whoever hired you that the Palazzo Dorado is not a target. It's a sanctuary, and sanctuaries don't fall." For a long moment, the commander said nothing. Then slowly he lowered his weapon. "This isn't over." "Yes," Alicia said. "It is." 20 minutes later, the black SUVs pulled away from the curb, carrying unconscious operators and a commander whose career would never recover from the story of how a janitor and a handful of criminals had beaten the unbeatable. Alicia stood at the broken door, watching them go, her gray jumpsuit covered in chemical foam and other people's blood that wasn't hers. Behind her, Paulo approached carefully. "How did you practice?" Alicia said simply, and understanding that violence is always the last option, not the first one. She turned back to the lobby, to the defenders who were emerging from their positions, battered but alive, victorious but quiet. "Someone help me fix these doors," she said. "And Paulo?" He looked up. "Get a mop. We've got a lot of cleaning to do." Dawn came slowly to the Palazzo Dorado, the way it always did in the city, not with fanfare or sudden brilliance, but with the gradual softening of darkness into gray, then gray into gold. The first light touched the tall windows and spilled across marble that had seen too much in the last 12 hours, illuminating scuff marks and chemical residue and the places where violence had tried very hard to take root and failed. The defenders had dispersed as the night retreated. Vasile back to his room on the 4th floor with a nod and nothing more. Katya to the breakfast lounge where she sat with coffee and her phone, already spinning the night's events into currency she could trade. The others melted away in the manner of people whose survival depended on knowing when to be present and when to become memory. Rocco remained at his post behind the concierge desk, filling out incident reports that would say everything and nothing, official documentation of an unofficial war. The doors had been temporarily secured with reinforced plywood and industrial adhesive until proper repairs could be made. The building's power had been restored one circuit at a time, bringing the chandeliers back to life, making the palazzo look almost normal again if you didn't look too closely at the bullet holes in the ceiling or the scorch marks near the south entrance. Paolo stood in the center of the lobby, exactly where he'd stood when this had all begun. His expensive suit was ruined, torn, stained with things he didn't want to think about, smelling of smoke and chemical foam and fear sweat. His bodyguards were gone, sent away with instructions to tell his organization that he was alive, that he was safe, that he would return when he was ready. They'd left confused but obedient, which was all Paolo could ask for. Now he stood alone, looking at the floor, at the place where he'd kicked over Alicia's bucket, where dirty water had spread across pristine marble, where he'd made his catastrophic mistake and changed the trajectory of his entire life in the span of a single arrogant gesture. The stain was still there, faint now, but visible if you knew where to look. A ghost of spilled water and kicked over dignity. Alicia emerged from the service corridor carrying her cart, the same dented aluminum cart she'd been pushing for 7 years, loaded with the same supplies, moving with the same methodical purpose. She'd changed into a fresh gray jumpsuit. Her hair was pulled back. If you didn't know what she'd done in the darkness, you'd think she was simply the cleaning woman arriving for her morning shift. She stopped when she saw Paolo standing there. She didn't say anything, didn't need to. The question hung in the air between them, like the last note of a song. Paolo walked to the service corridor, pushed through the door Alicia had left open, and found what he was looking for in the janitor's closet. A yellow bucket, a mop, bottles of cleaning solution arranged with the same military precision Alicia had used to arrange the defense. He filled the bucket with hot water from the utility sink, added the precise amount of solution he'd watched her use a dozen times during the siege, and carried it back to the lobby. His hands shook slightly as he set it down. Not from fear anymore, from something else. Something that felt like the first day of school, or a baptism, or the moment before you step off a cliff and trust that the ground will catch you. He knelt. The marble was cold against his knees. Expensive fabric meeting utilitarian stone. Paolo dipped a cloth into the bucket, wrung it out the way he'd seen Alicia do it, not too wet, not too dry, and began to scrub. The stain resisted at first, stubborn, like it knew what it represented. But Paolo was stubborn too, and he understood now that pride was a luxury he could no longer afford. He scrubbed in small circles, patient, thorough, the way someone works when they're not just cleaning a floor, but performing penance. Alicia watched from beside her cart. She didn't help, didn't offer advice. This wasn't something that could be taught. This was something that had to be earned, one small circle at a time, until the stain disappeared and something else took its place. The lobby began to wake around them. Early risers descending from their rooms. The smell of coffee drifting from the breakfast lounge. The soft jazz starting up again from the hidden speakers, piano and bass in conversation, playing something that sounded like forgiveness set to rhythm. Paolo finished scrubbing. The stain was gone. The marble gleamed. He sat back on his heels, looking at his work, at the clean floor that erased the physical evidence of his mistake, but would never erase the memory of what that mistake had cost and what it had taught. Alicia approached and handed him a fresh towel, white, folded with precision. "For your hands," she said. Paolo took it, dried his palms, the cloth coming away gray with cleaning solution and dissolved pride. He stood slowly, his knees protesting, his body reminding him that he wasn't built for this kind of work. "Is it acceptable?" he asked, gesturing to the floor. Alicia examined his work with the critical eye of a master evaluating a student. She crouched, ran her finger across the marble, checked the edges where the stain had been. Then she stood and nodded once. Not effusively, not with praise, just acknowledgement that the work had been done and done properly. "It's a start," she said. Paolo understood. The floor was clean, but the debt wasn't paid. Not yet. Maybe not ever. Some things couldn't be scrubbed away with soap and water. Some things had to be worked off over time, one floor at a time, one day at a time, until the person who'd kicked the bucket became someone different from the person who now held the mop. "I'd like to stay," Paolo said. The words came out quieter than he'd intended, but they came out true. "If you'll have me, not as a guest, as—" He struggled for the right word. "As a guardian," Alicia finished. She picked up her mop, tested its weight, then held it out to him. "The position doesn't pay much. The hours are terrible, and the clientele can be difficult." Paolo took the mop. Its handle was worn smooth from years of use, warm from Alicia's hands, heavier than it looked. It felt like a sword. It felt like a promise. "I've had worse jobs," he said. Alicia smiled, small, genuine. The smile of someone who'd seen a lot of people try to change and watched most of them fail, but who still believed in the possibility that sometimes, rarely, miraculously, the floor could be cleaned, and the person could be different, and the sanctuary could hold. "Then let's get to work," she said. "Those windows won't polish themselves." They moved through the lobby together, Alicia with her cart and Paolo with his mop, guardian and apprentice, teaching and learning, maintaining the peace one careful action at a time. Outside, the city woke to another day of violence and chaos and all the things that made sanctuaries necessary. But inside the Palazzo Dorado, the jazz played on, the coffee smelled like promise, and two people pushed mops across marble that had seen war and chosen peace. And in the fountain, where Paolo's gun had floated, goldfish swam in lazy circles, unbothered by history, moving through water that caught the morning light and turned it into something that looked almost like redemption